That's a great garden restoration. Thanks for sharing your work with us. And now we're going to be talking about, well, it's a difficult subject, getting ready for fires. We had a terrible year last year, and right now I'm joined by Patrick Allen from the Wildland Urban, who's a Wildland Urban Interface Specialist for the Texas Forest Service, and it's a real pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking about fire prevention, and obviously last year's weighing on everybody's minds.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we had a devastating wildfire season last year that was historic across Texas, and we burned close to 4 million acres in Texas.
4 million acres. Mm-hmm. That is bigger than some states.
Absolutely, and we had a lot of other states, firefighters from other states, helping us in that time period.
Mm-hmm. So I think you have people's attention on this subject, but we can't relax. Even though this year it started off, fortunately, with some great rain. It seems like in the past few weeks here we've gone around the bend. We're back in that dry mode, and the heat is obviously on. So we want to give people the best tips they can about what they can do to prevent situations like last year. So let's start in by talking about the big picture, I guess, some of the efforts that are underway that the Texas Forest Service and others are working to educate the public.
Absolutely. Well, here in Texas, after we experienced last year's fire seasons and then previous fire seasons that were devastating, residents and then the Texas Forest Service firefighting agencies have taken more of a proactive approach rather than reactive like we've had in the past. So we've launched an educational campaign for community members and landowners on ways they can protect their property, protect their families, and protect their homes from the devastating effects of wildfire. And there's simple ways that you can do that and achieve that, and through a couple programs that Texas Forest Service offers and then nationally offers. Mm-hmm. The Firewise Communities USA program and then the Ready, Set, Go program offer several simple techniques, gardening techniques, landscaping techniques to reduce that overall risk. Now, granted, on some days when the wind is blowing really hard, we have really low relative humidities and the drought's been going on for months and months. Sometimes there's just nothing you can do, but at least you can evacuate safely and know that when you do leave, you've done everything you can to prepare your property and your home for wildfire.
Yeah, and we will be talking about planning for these contingencies and planning your escape routes and being ready. Mm-hmm. In case you do have one of those days. And I actually drove by the wildfires the day they started in Bastrop with that howling wind, a bone dry day. And actually the day before I was driving past through the same area and I thought, dear Lord, let nobody drop a match.
Right.
And sure enough, the next day it wasn't a match, I don't think, but there you go. I mean, you could just feel it being set up on those windy days. So let's start by talking about some of the homeowner education piece that you're doing and some of the things that are just make common sense for folks to do. And here in the Central Texas region, we have hundreds of thousands of people now living in an area that looks, for all intents and purposes, like Southern California, mm-hmm. except for a little hotter and drier.
Right, exactly. And what we've had people moving into those traditional rural areas, and that's mm-hmm. what we call the Wildland Urban Interface. And in those zones, we like to incorporate Firewise principles. And Firewise is kind of jargon, but that just means ways that community members and people can prepare their properties by activities such as placement and proximity of plants to structures, deciding what to plant closest to your house. There's zones that we call in the home ignition zone. There's several zones, 1, 2, and 3. Zone 1 is the first 30 feet from the house out. Zone 2 is the next, just up to about 100 feet, 70 to 100 feet. And then Zone 3 is going to be your wildland or rural area that you really wouldn't want to worry too much about. But in Zone 1, you just want to consider placement of plants and then what to plant as well. Fire-resistant plants mm-hmm. that have less resin in them, and plants that have more moisture content.
Right. Greener plants, some woody plants would be okay in this setting, but avoid things like, you say, resin or oil content.
Yeah, absolutely. Plants that have moisture content is really the single most important thing when you're deciding what's more volatile and what's less volatile in regards to a plant. So there's certain plants that, even though they may have a high moisture content, they still have a high oil or resin content. And no matter how much you water those plants, they're still going to be available to burn more readily than a
Right.
plant that would have more moisture content.
I have a real good example from my own garden. I used to, and you'll probably hate hearing this, I used to actually weed some of the pathways in my garden using a flamethrower. Yeah, I'm feeling real guilty right now even saying this, but this is years ago. And, you know, I was at granite gravel pathways, you know, so I was trying to keep it only in the stone area, but I got close to a rosemary plant one time. And literally, you know, just brushing by that plant, in 5 seconds, it was a ball of fire.
Yeah, exactly. And that plant would have the higher resin content.
Yeah,
and
very oily.
hopefully it wasn't planted next to any structure, any deck that
Very
could have
fortunate.
ignited.
Very fortunate in that, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, when you're looking at things like that, you can have plants like that close to your house. You can have them close to decks, but you don't want a lot of them. You want to consider spacing, so that way, if they do ignite, like in your case, if they do ignite what we call torch, they won't threaten other plants to create a chain effect, or they won't threaten the structures and cause higher damage, higher value at risk.
So really, after last year, thinking about if I lived, say, in a place like Westlake, which is an area that I worry about a lot in this area, in the Central Texas region, you know, densely populated in that interface zone.
Right.
I would be xeriscaping around that, and that 30-foot zone. I would have gravel and maybe succulent plants or things like that that would not be burning.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that's obviously a homeowner's choice whether they want to xeriscape. That would be, you know, the ideal situation as far as firefighters go. But a lot of people we see that have moved into these wildland areas, they've moved out there just for that reason. They want to be closer to nature. They want their piece of rural area. So they don't want to go cut down all the trees around their house or remove all the vegetation. And it's fine to have trees next to your house and trees with high resin content, but again, it comes down to that placement. That if they do ignite, you want to, first of all, you want to minimize the chance of igniting, such as limbing up trees and limbing up that ladder fuel for it to get in that content. Because what you're doing is you're reducing the intensity of the fire closest to the house.
Yeah. And when you say limb up, you're just saying removal of the limbs closer to the ground, so that if, say, a grass fire comes through, you don't have low-hanging cedar branches just a few feet from that.
Absolutely, yeah. That's what it means. You take the tree, the overall tree or the overall plant, the bush, you would break it into thirds and you limb up that bottom third. And that also promotes a healthy plant. It promotes vertical growth rather than horizontal growth. And grasses are the main carrier of a fire. So you want to be able to have a landscape that can have a fire on it, but it won't destroy your house.
What about some retrofits to the house itself? Are there some things that people should be considering?
Absolutely. Whenever you're retrofitting your house or even building a new home, you want to build it with non-combustible materials, building decks with hardy board or planks that are made out of anything besides wood. Because anything that's attached to the structure is considered part of the structure, including decks and fences, wooden fence lines. And we saw this over and over again last year. I'm part of a team that goes in and does post-assessments on homes after they've burned, and we try to determine why they burned and which way the fire ignited them from. And over and over again, we saw homes that they ignited because they had decks or fences that ignited further from the house, and then it just acted as a wick and led to the house and ignited the structure that way.
Wow, that's a scary thought. What do you think about the millions of miles of wood fence that are in the metropolitan area here?
Right, and there's ways you can retrofit that. I mean, even simply whenever your fire's coming, opening the gate and making it so the fire can't have a contiguous wick to the house.
Right. So obviously thinking in zones, retrofitting the home, lots of stuff to consider here. We haven't talked about planning ahead, and that's, I think, really critical, because some people, it's very possible to get caught in this situation. Absolutely,
and that's what the Ready, Set, Go program, which is a program that was introduced to us by the International Association of Fire Chiefs. It's a national program. And it's meant to be for rural fire departments to spread to their communities and have that communication component with their communities. And on a household basis, you would take this plan, and it has checklists to go through in the event of an evacuation or in the event you need to get out quickly. You know, the family knows what to do when that wildfire is coming. The ready part of it incorporates the Firewise principles, removing dense and dead vegetation, preparing for that wildfire on your property. The set part of it is actually when the wildfire is in the area, you know what to do, you know where to meet your family, and the go part of it is the most important, and that's evacuating safely. Nothing you own is worth your life.
Yeah, well, and you know the idea. I've heard people say, "Oh, I'd stand there with with my garden hose." I don't think that's going to be an effective strategy on the kind of fire situations that we've seen.
Right, and you know every fire is different. There's no one fire that's the same, but these fires that we've been seeing in the last year and then the years before, they're getting very big very quickly, and even traditional firefighting techniques are ineffective.
Well, obviously people need to take this seriously, and I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of great resources associated with these programs on the web that people can find.
Absolutely.
And we'll have the web address obviously here on the screen. But thank you so much for coming on Central Texas Gardener and sharing this critical information for our audience. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, thank you. And coming up next is our friend Daphne.